Hello, it's Andrew Eborn, and welcome along to another thrilling edition of the Andrew Eborn Show, where we are questioning everything. And I'm delighted to be joined yet again by the wonderful Philip Mantle. How are you, Philip?
Good evening, Andrew. I'm fine, thank you.
It's wonderful and really, really interesting. Last time we were speaking about Roswell, July 1947, and the different theories, and we analysed some of the evidence which is there. And we realized that because there's no empirical evidence either side, both explanations could have some sort of credibility. But I think we sided on the sort of military explanation a little bit more because it sort of would fit a bit better than the alien side. Is that a fair summary?
I think it is, yes.
Okay. But we're open, as always, to evidence. And if people have evidence, then bring it forward and let's have that discussion. One of the things that did come about, you mentioned last time, was people talked about bodies and bodies in the crash. And that story you said last time only came about sort of 5 years after 1947, at the beginning of the 50s, 1952, 53. People started talking about bodies. And as a result of people talking about bodies, they came up with another explanation about it being, oh, hang about, they were only dummies who crashed there. And more conspiracy theories came and so on and so forth. Now, in 1995, a film was put out in public. Talk to us about the Alien Autopsy.
Yeah, well, you know, we're talking, the Alien Autopsy surfaced in to begin with, around about 1993. We're at the height of the X-Files craze here on television, you know, and I was part of an organization called the British UFO Research Association, BUFORA. And one of the things I used to do for them, I was their press officer. So in 1993, had a letter from a company called the Merlin Group in London, asking if we would be able to assist in making a UFO documentary. Didn't mention Roswell, nothing specific. It's signed by a gentleman called Ray Santilli. So I replied in the old-fashioned way, you know, a letter, sent him some information about the association, telling him what we could and couldn't do. So we exchanged some correspondence, and I started talking to Ray on the telephone, and he was looking for providers of photographs and film clips. We couldn't provide that, but I knew people that could. So, and then out of the blue, the conversation changed. And he said, I've actually got film of the crash at Roswell. What? Yeah. And the bodies, you know, that been autopsied. So I just said, well, show me. You make the claim, support it. Yes, I can. No, I can't. So there was a movie being released, nothing to do with Roswell, and I was hired to help promote it. So it's based on a true story. So two of the participants, the real guys, were in London to promote the film. The film was called Fire in the Sky. So we had Travis Walton and Mike Rogers in London, and I put on an evening presentation for them. And where we had this presentation wasn't far from where Ray Santilli's offices were, so I invited him along. So I met him there, and he went on to tell me that in 1992, he'd been in Cleveland, Ohio, put an advert in some of the local newspapers looking for Elvis memorabilia. He said his main source of work was the music business, you know. And this old chap came forward and said, I used to work for X company back in the 50s. They're long since gone, so there's no copyright. And I have a short clip of Elvis. Want to buy it? Yeah, shook hands. No copyright to worry about. Cash, done. But Ray Santilli said, before we came to left, this old boy came back. He said, well, before I was a freelance cameraman, I was in the military. And in 1947, I was flown to Roswell, New Mexico, and I filmed the Roswell crash. Are you interested? Ray said, I had no idea what Roswell was, but it got my interest. He said he took an internal flight to this gentleman's home. He took a reel of film out, put it on the projector and showed him on it. And they agreed a deal in principle there and then. The deal was he'd buy all the film, wouldn't release this old boy's name, and he would pay him, you know, X amount of $1,000. That was it. So I said, a great story. Show me it. Yes, I can. No, I can't. Yeah. So in the end, I said, forget it. You know. So we moved forward in time to 1995, and there was actually a movie made called Roswell, and it was being released here on VHS on video, and I was sent a review copy, and I thought, oh, excuse me, I thought, what if that Santilli chap still claims to have this film? And I got his business card, so I phoned him up out of the blue, and he says, yes, Philip, but you don't believe me. Well, I said, I can't believe you until you show me the damn thing. He says, make an appointment with my secretary, and I'll, you know, come on down. I live 200 miles north of London. He says, come on down, I'll show you. So me and my wife did. Off we drove to London, and he showed us the film. And so at least I could confirm that film did exist. The first piece he showed us was called the tent footage. Pretty dark, about 8 minutes long, black and white, no soundtrack. He said that one of the creatures is on this slab and it's been examined in a field tent before it was taken away. He actually gave me a copy of it, Andrew. I have it still here on VHS. Over the next few weeks, he showed us 2 separate autopsy films, much brighter. So you're now in a medical facility, and the creature's dissected, cut open, brains taken out, all that. Then he showed us some wreckage, some debris. So with Bufora, I was also their conference organizer, and I already had a conference organized in 1995 to Hallam University in Sheffield. And I said to Ray, what do you intend to do with this film? He says, I'm going to make my own little documentary on video. All the film will be on it, and you'll be able to buy it in your local Blockbuster or Woolworths or direct from me. So I said, would you show it at our conference? He says, yeah. So we shook hands. That was it. You know, I thought we need to get this film out into the open because that's the only way. Ray clearly had his own objectives here. And I thought, if you get it out in the open, then somebody might come forward and say, well, that was my studio it was filmed in, or I'm the cameraman, or I did this, you know, I bought the props for it. Alternatively, if it was real, Andrew, somebody might come forward and say, that's me. I'm now, you know, 90-some year old, or that was my grandfather told me this story. So anyway, time moved, you know, things moved on, and the story of the film got out into the public domain by accident. It was my fault, I let slip. And like the original Roswell press release, this too went around the world. And I was getting phone calls and faxes from every television station you could think of. And I remember speaking to one chap, and he said, I've been trying to speak to you for 3 days. Why can't you get another telephone? I said, well, it doesn't matter how many telephones I've got. There's only me here to answer it. You know? And that's how it took off. So that's when the media became involved, and television and so on. And of course, you know, Ray did turn up at our conference and he showed one autopsy film. He took questions from the audience. The very next day, it was shown on television around the world. And he did indeed make his own video as well that you could buy.
When you saw it at your conference with a group of people, by their very nature, it's called a UFO group. They've got their own beliefs, if you like. What was the reaction to people seeing that movie?
Well, you could hear a pin drop, literally, Andrew. The theatre was packed. It was so popular, we had to hire another room upstairs and beam it all via closed circuit television. And I'll give you an example. The night before, a lady rang me from Washington, D.C. and said, I want a ticket. I haven't got any. She says, I'm coming anyway. So I said, give me your name. And my wife was by the door. And I said, if this lady turns up, please find her a seat. And lo and behold, she turned up. And we had some stewards in the theatre. I just made one of them stand up, you know, and let her take. I didn't charge her any entrance fee. I thought, fair play to you. And there was TV crews there from around the world, and you could hear a pin drop. I mean, there was even a lady down the front crying. I kid you not.
And I mean, we worked out in earlier episodes that you, from a very early age, you questioned everything, even when you were on the factory floor and you were told there's a 17-second rule as to what before you can do this with this machine. You said, well, hang on, why is there a 17-second film? When you, Philip Mantle, saw this film for the first time, the tent footage, I think it's called, when you saw the tent footage, What did you think?
I thought this is what I expected to see. It wasn't very clear. It wasn't the best quality piece of film. It was open to question about what you were actually seeing on it. Although you could see the head and the big dark eyes, but could this have been some poor injured airman, you know, or you know, and the doctors are trying to do something. There's too many white coats in this. You can see the faces, Andrew. We weren't hiding anything. And there's a man walks with his back to the camera every now and again. So I was impressed more with that because of its poor quality. Bearing in mind the backstory had been that this had been lying in an old boy's cellar for the last 40, 50 years, you know, and it had been transferred from 16mm onto VHS. So, you know, when you transfer things, you always lose a bit of it always degrades a little bit in quality. And I thought that. But then when you see the two autopsy films, it's important I mention there's two, they were totally the opposite. They were bright, clear, you could see everything, no problem in seeing what the creature looks like. It's got no clothing on. So I was less impressed. That's why I asked Ray Santilli what his intentions were to do with it.
Sure.
But that's how they could then plan what my response was.
Sure, but before we come on to the second film, and we will come on to the second film, it's very important for this first film because you have a room full of people flying in throughout the world. You've generated a lot of buzz by their very nature. It's UFO, so they've got a certain mindset. People are hungry. They want to believe that this is footage of an alien. That's what they want to believe.
Yeah.
Do you, Philip Mantle, believe that what you saw was footage of an alien?
No. I believe it's a fake. In fact, I don't like to use the word believe. I know it's a fake, and I'm quite positive I can prove it.
Okay. Did you, when you saw it on that night in your UFO group, did you say, hang about, this is a fake?
No.
Why not?
Because that's very easy to do, isn't it, Andrew? I mean, you worked in the legal profession. Would you just say that man's guilty?
No, but I'm asking questions, and that's why I'm asking questions. I'm saying, it's all very well. It's more than 25 years after, or 27 ye've got the position. This is the taking questions and answers. You would turn around and say, you said in the room, a pin could drop. You know that.
Oh, absolutely. What I want, there's more to the story as straightforward as that. I took it personally. I mean, there were those that accused me of being Ray Santilli's accomplice, for example, or that I'd been paid, large amounts of money to support the authenticity of the film. The way they got that story is because at the time, I was having an extension built on my house because the children were getting bigger. And they said, well, Philip Mantle doesn't have that kind of money. Well, they were right. I didn't. My wife did. She'd had her own property, which we'd sold, and that's how we built the extension. So what I decided to do, rightly or wrongly, I got to know Ray Santilli a little bit. It was the kind of gentleman that if you confronted him, he would just blank you. Andrew, that would be it. He wouldn't answer your phone calls or your emails or anything. Because that's what happened with Stanton Friedman. Stanton Friedman met Ray. I arranged for a meeting. He then faxed him a list of demands, not questions, but demands. So Ray just said, who is this guy? There's your demands, and they went straight in the bin. So I thought, well, the direct approach is not gonna work.
Before we leave that, what sort of demands did Ray make?
Oh, he demanded, bits of the film, the cameraman's name, rank, and serial number, and a whole host of things. So I took rightly or wrongly, I decided on the spot that in public I would support Ray, but behind the scenes I would work with anyone who was trying to get to the bottom of it. It became clear that Ray was not going to offer any film for analysis. Bearing in mind, he lived in Hertfordshire, and so did Kodak. I arranged with Kodak UK to analyze the film free of charge. And they said, great, we won't comment on what it may depict, but we'll analyze it for its age. They even said, we'll bring in the British Film Institute because they're nearby. They're experts on old film. And there were a few little things that helped Ray Santilli. About the same time, someone found a piece of film of Winston Churchill visiting the United States during the war. I think it was up top of the Empire State Building. And it was so clear, Andrew, it looked like it had been shot yesterday, you know. Then there was this story about, well, if this was real military film, it never escaped the authorities and get out of the United States. Here in the UK, a chap went to a car boot sale and he bought some old VHS cassettes, puts one in the TV when he gets home, and it's actually secret SAS training video. So, you know, top secret stuff does get out into, you know, the public domain. So that kind of helped his argument, you know. And so what I fully expected to happen, the day after our conference, it went out around the world. The main show was the Fox broadcast in the States, Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction. It was so popular, they made the producer do 2 specials to follow it. It was, you know, and I thought, right, people will now start to come forward. Let me just sit back, you know, I've done my job. I've got it out into the public domain better than I ever could have expected. You know, it was in Saudi Arabia. The Russians showed it. You know, it went through scan everywhere. Nothing. Not a thing. You know, the old tumbleweed effect? It was just like I'm sat there, nothing. Not a word. And I couldn't believe it. You know, but there wasn't any word one way or another saying I support it. You know, the people were arguing about it. The internet had just started. There was no Google or anything like that, but it was the first internet UFO argument. It really was. So there was these CompuServe forums and various other things. But there was nobody saying, well, that's me, and I'm one of the actors. Or, you know, it was on my film studio where they made it. And so I just thought, right, well, I'm because it became so personal, the accusations that were, you know, pointed in my direction. I sat and had lunch with Ray one day and I said, I'll get to the bottom of it. I will. And he said, that's all right, Philip, no problem. And he smiled and we just carried on. And so again, rather than, some people might say I'm naive, I don't think so, because the film had just been seen by tens of millions of people around the world, and it continued to be re-shown, and then, you know, ended up online and all kinds of stuff. I felt vindicated, but nobody came forward. So, okay, we'll work with what we've got, Andrew. All we've got is the videotape. Bearing in mind, we've got actually 4 films at this point. Ray Santilli came out with a story that he disowned the tent footage, the first piece of film that anyone had been seen, not just he said he'd taken it to a lab and they'd pulled some kind of stunt on him, that they'd made it. He said, I took some film to be transferred onto video. There was nothing on it. And they went away and made this and brought it back and told me what this was on the film. And he had it withdrawn from broadcast. So he disowned the first piece of film that he'd shown everybody, which is called the tent footage.
So it's just be clear on this before we get on to the other 3 then. The tent footage is what was shown to your group that night, is that right?
No, he showed one of the autopsy films.
So is that different? So the tent footage, okay. Yeah. So Ray is saying that the tent, well, just so we got clarity on this, what did he buy from a guy? I get it, he bought some footage. This is his story, and we'll ask Ray directly, but this is his story. He told you that he bought some footage from a chap in the States, originally looking for Elvis footage, and this chap sold him some Elvis footage, and we'll come on to that in a bit. But in addition to that, this chap said, well, I was a military cameraman and I've got some film of Roswell. Do you want to buy that as well? That's Ray's story. The footage that Ray then bought, if he bought from this chap, he then had 2 different films. Is that what you're saying? Or talk me through that.
Oh, he had, I mean, the 16 millimeter runs for, I think, about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
A normal standard 16 millimeter reel of film runs for about 3 minutes.
Yeah. 25 frames a second. A lot of frames.
Yeah. So Ray had 20 odd canisters of film. Some had more in than others.
Okay.
and these had labels on, supposedly telling you what they were, what they showed, you know. And one was the tent footage. He claims it was on 16mm. He gave it to this company, Milton Keynes. Unbeknown to him, there was nothing on the film. And they went away and filmed this fake tent footage and gave him it back. That was his explanation.
So
then we have...
That's just to deal with that bit. So, and I say we should ask Ray directly, but you're saying that he bought this stuff from this chap. This is his story. He bought this stuff from the chap, but this particular film was blank. And so he went to get it processed, and the third party went to all the effort to film something and put it on that film. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they put it on video. They didn't put it on 16mm. They put it on video.
Right.
And gave it back to Ray and said, this is what we retrieved off that piece of film you asked us to transfer. He hadn't checked it. Then we have 2 autopsy films. It's the same creature, same room, same medical technicians in their hazmat gear. However, one of the creatures has got a damaged leg. The other one is fully intact, and they do slightly different medical procedures. The one with the hole in the leg.
How many creatures are there altogether?
How many creatures are there altogether? There's only one on the slab.
One on the slab. You mentioned another creature. What was that one?
Yeah, that's a separate film. There's 2 separate films.
Okay. Okay.
So in each film, it shows you the same type of creature.
Okay.
But one's got a big hole in its leg. The other one hasn't.
Okay.
And they carry out slightly different medical procedures.
Right.
The one with the hole in the leg is the one that was shown at our conference in Sheffield. That is the one that's been shown around the world on television and now online. The other one was only ever shown to me and a number of colleagues in Ray Santilli's office just one time, once. I have 3 poor quality still photographs from it, but you can see the legs on it, so you can see the legs are not damaged.
Right. And when you saw it in Ray's office, what did you say to him?
I was astounded because I wasn't expecting it. Bearing in mind, I'd seen the tent footage, which was dark and grainy, and you had to sort of try and lighten the contrast on the old VHS machine so you could make it out a bit clearer. I was expecting more of that kind of thing. So, hey presto, it bang, and it's in your face. And I was surprised. I was not expecting that at all. Because Ray just said, I've got some more film for you. He didn't go into any great detail about what I was about to see. I think that was part of the plan, actually. So he could see the look on your face when he popped it in the VHS. You weren't prepared. But I'm only guessing at that. But so I was amazed, you know.
But what
I looked at Ray.
Did you? But you said beforehand you didn't believe the tent footage, the one which was shown to your group. But you went along with it because you didn't want to embarrass Ray in front of everybody. And there was this theory that you built your extension and people thought you were being paid by Ray or whatever. The whole thing there, you went along with that story. When you went to his office, you say you were amazed. Were you amazed because what you saw you thought was real? Or you were amazed at the audacity of showing you another film?
I was amazed at what could possibly be authentic at that point.
Right. So you thought it was authentic?
Possibly.
Okay.
And again, we take it into the context I told you about the Churchill film and the tapes being found on the car boot. And I said, and I remember looking at Ray and thinking, with the greatest will in the world, I don't dislike Ray, but he is a bit of a jack the lad, you know. What would be the odds on someone like Ray stumbling across this material when all these people have been looking for physical evidence to prove Roswell and found nothing? You know, the Stanton Friedmans of this world, they've interviewed everybody under the sun, but had no evidence. And here's a little businessman from London who happens to stumble across it. And I thought, it wouldn't surprise me, you know, it would not surprise me if this didn't happen. So, but then I looked at Ray and I spoke to him about his business. Ray never made anything original, Andrew. he would put together old pop groups from the 1960s and re-record some of their hits, or he would license their back catalogue, or he'd buy something at an auction, you know. And I remember one day he got a shoebox full of photographs. Amazed at these photographs. They're all unpublished photographs of the Beatles. And he was like a kid in a candy store. The ironic thing about this whole story is that the part of it that is true is his trip to Cleveland, Ohio in 1992, because he was featured when he came back. I think it was either the Daily Mirror or the Sunday Mirror. And there was an article featuring Ray about Elvis's last letters. So Elvis had written to one of his fans, and Ray had got hold of the letters, claiming that these were the last letters ever written before Elvis died. So he was out there certainly looking for memorabilia. I've no doubt. Doesn't mind mentioning it buying any Elvis film, by the way, you know. So we were astounded, all of us were astounded. And it was a question, well, what we're going to do? Do I sit here and do nothing and just let Ray get on with it? But well, I couldn't walk away, Andrew. I have to be honest. And that's why I said to Ray, what are you intending to do with this film? And he went, I'm going to make this documentary. Well, I actually helped him make that. It's narrated by Brian Blessed. And I helped. That's what he paid me for. I think he paid me a couple of £1,000 to help make this documentary. And that's where the rumors. But what is interesting, there was also another thing on it.
But it's not. Before you say it's not a rumor. I mean, you were paid.
No. There is the rumor mill was going, which is an important part of it.
Yeah.
Because the name Spielberg had already been mentioned a couple of years before in a newspaper article.
Yes.
He was making a film about Roswell. Okay. So Spielberg's name cropped up again, and I thought, surely, you know, but it wasn't the legendary movie director Steven Spielberg. It was actually a gentleman by the name of Volker Spielberg.
Volker Spielberg, okay.
Volker was a German gentleman. He was a business associate of Ray Santilli's, and that's where the Spielberg name got associated.
And no relation at all to Steven?
Not a thing, not a word. Couldn't be as different if he tried.
Okay.
You know? So, you know, even the rumor mill got running, and Ray, you know, did his best to use that to his own means, of course. So my plan, if you had it, it's easy. A lot of people did say it's fake, but couldn't prove it nonetheless. Some of them even made themselves look a bit silly, saying, I've got it. There's a phone on the wall. It's got a curly coil. They didn't have such things in 1947. Well, I'm afraid they did. You know, there's a museum in America that's all about telephones. One phone call to them said, yeah, you know, you just paid a bit of extra money for the curly flex. So we went with what we got, which is the film. We only had one film now. Ray had the other one had disappeared. So we check all the artifacts on it. Well, I'll come to that in a second.
Yeah.
Check all the artifacts on it. There's a clock on the wall. That's fine. There's a microphone hanging down. That's fine. You know, everything is circa 1947. There's not a digital watch there or anything like that.
Right.
Can't see anybody's faces. So what do? You know, we needed evidence. And, you know, the evidence was give us a piece of film that we can test. That didn't happen, despite Ray's claim that he'd shown it to Kodak. He'd only shown them some leader film, which has no image on it whatsoever. And I just thought, well, I'm going to stick at it. So I said to Ray, what happened to the other autopsy film? There's two of them. He said, well, Volker Spielberg is my business partner. You know, he's a very eccentric guy, and he collects all kinds of stuff. And part of the deal was he got one of the films. I got one, and he got one, and he's kept it, decided not to show it. And there was a French television show, went out live, that was at a studio audience and had Ray Santilli on it. And they actually tracked down Volker Spielberg and got him on the phone. And all you got was expletives from him, you know.
Pardon my French.
Yeah, but he was a real guy. He wasn't somebody mythical. He really did exist, you know. So we were left with that, and we had the debris piece of film. I mean, the I-beams in that are very large, not the small things that young Marcel described. And they've got an inscription on it. And I've got photographs of it. I sent them to some very high up establishments, the British Museum, museums of Scotland, saying, can you understand what these markings are? Not a clue, none of them. I sent the film itself to a number of medical experts. Surely if this is an autopsy, that's the right people. We got doctors from all over. Most of them said, it looks pretty kosher. It looks like, they may not be the best at doing autopsies, but then how many would you do in the military? Maybe not a lot, So that the medical profession were largely in favor of it looking. They wouldn't comment on the creature, say it looks like these people know what they're doing. And special effects, of course, we showed it to special effects artists. They, to a man, said I could make one of them, which is what you would expect them to do. I said, well, I'm not asking you if you can make it. I'm asking you if you did, was it you? And I remember speaking to several of them and saying, no, it wasn't me, but it looks like it might be so-and-so's work. So they'd give me this chap's name and I'd ring him and it's, no, not me, but it's so-and-so. And I just went around and around. No two names were ever mentioned twice, Andrew. And I was clearly getting nowhere with the special effects. So then, but there was one special effects company called the Really Dangerous Company in the States. And they put a little thing out and it was things you should look for. And I'm looking at, and they give you so put the Alien Autopsy film in your VHS player. And at this point, look here. And you started to see little things that didn't quite add up. For example, when they start to saw the head open, they peel back the skull cap and the head wobbles. It's not connected to the neck. Well, it should be. Your spinal cord should connect it to the neck. When they cut the body open, blood flows. Gravity works. So one of the gentlemen said, well, if you die and you're laid flat on a surface, gravity takes over and all your bodily fluids flow to the bottom. And you actually end up with a flat person underneath. Your bum is flat, where your legs touch the table are flat, because that's how this thing looks like it's stood up. There's no flat bottom on it. It should be flat underneath. And you can't say, well, it's an alien, it has different physiology, because they cut it open and the blood does exactly that. It runs downwards with gravity. So little things like that didn't prove it was a fake, but it gave big indications that all was not right here. And I wondered at that point, had Santilli been fooled? Had he bought something that he maybe genuinely thought was the real McCoy, but, he spent so much money and he found out it wasn't, that there was no backing out. He got into, because again, Ray never made anything. I thought, well, if this is a fake film, Ray Santilli did not make it. And that's the stance I took. And I just headed off. And what I tried to do is, I would say, I'll shake the Alien Autopsy tree. I shake it every now and again and see what falls out of it. First off, I got an email from a chap called Keith. I know something about the Alien Autopsy film. Here's my number. So I ring him. He says, I'm in video animation. So I went to this company in Milton Keynes for a job. And I'm sat there waiting and they're chatting away and the phone rings. And they're talking away and I'm right next to them. And they're speaking to Ray Santilli. So chap puts the phone down and Keith says, was that Ray Santilli, Alien Autopsy guy? And they said, don't be daft. We made that. So Keith says, you made what? And they showed him a piece of film. Now Keith says, I've never seen this film. What they actually showed him was the tent footage. This was the place that Ray Santilli was talking, but they had a different story. And one of the people involved was another Keith. He was called Keith Bateman. The company was called AK Music. They did a lot of animation. They made karaoke videos. I tracked down Keith. By the time I got him, the company had closed, but I got his particulars from Company House. And eventually, he told me the story. He said, "What?" He said, "I used to work not for, but with Ray Santilli. And we'd have stupid, silly brainstorming sessions. And one day, we sat and chatting away, and Ray Santilli himself said, 'Wouldn't it be great if we had some Roswell footage?' So it just so happens one of my employees, they sat there with a book, and it has Roswell in it. So Keith didn't say anything to Santilli. He let him go away. He went off to a farm in Bedfordshire and made the tent footage. The head you see is actually a polystyrene head that you put wigs on.
How do you know that? How do you know it's a polystyrene head?
Because Keith showed me it. He's still got it.
Oh, he's still got it. Okay.
Yeah, still has it. Under the blanket, it's covered with the blanket, is actually Keith's son. So you do see a body laid underneath. The two doctors in white coats, one of Keith's employees, the other was the butcher. So you see him handling this material. It's from the butchers, and the man who walks in front of the camera, he's the farmer. So not only did I interview Keith, I also interviewed some of his employees who were involved. One is a gentleman by the name of Philip Yarman. Philip says Keith gave me the video, which was originally shot in color, by the way. He said, and we run it through the computer, changed it to black and white. I put scratches on it and things like this. And there was another chap there called Andy. He wasn't directly involved, but he took part in it. You know, he was there at the time. And they delivered this tape to Ray Santilli. And his comments were, "That's rubbish. Go away and get me a quote for something really good, some really clear and bright stuff." So Keith did. I won't say the studio that he contacted because I don't want him to get them involved. And he came back with a price, £30,000 to £40,000 to make a good autopsy film. So Ray said, "Oh, forget it." However, Ray kept the tent footage. And it's shortly after that is when I get his letter from him. And then later on, we start talking about the autopsy. You know, the candle had been lit, or the blue touch paper had been lit. Now, you mentioned to me earlier on about Cam. Yeah. So we're talking away, and then a few years, I'll come to that in a second. A couple of years down the line, things haven't really moved on. I got another email from a chap called Simon. And he just said, "Is there any interest in the Alien Autopsy film?" What Simon had seen is there used to be a magazine called UFO magazine that was on the newsstand, and I'd written an update, and it was on the front cover. So I said, "Yeah." I said, "But a lot of it is online now, Simon." I said, "Why do you ask?" He says, "My friend made the dummies for it." "Really?" "Yeah." "Do you want to meet?" "Yeah." So I met Simon in Manchester. He's choosing. He picked a particular cafe. We met there. And he said, "You know, my friend made the dummies for Ray Santilli. He's looking for a television deal. Can you help?" I said, "Well, the only guy I know is the one in America that made Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction. He's a gentleman called Bob Kiviat. I'll send you his email." So that's what I did. Simon's friend and his business advisor got in touch with Bob. They had a conversation, and he wanted to spill the beans. Now, Simon wouldn't tell me who his friend was. So I don't know if he did it on purpose or by accident, but he let slip one of the projects he'd been involved in. Now, back in the 80s, there was a very successful Channel 4 program called Max Headroom.
Oh, yes, I remember Max Headroom, absolutely.
Max Headroom was made by this guy.
Ah.
So we took we did some digging. There wasn't as much on Google then as there is now, but we found his name. And he's not a special effects artist per se, Andrew. He's a sculptor.
Right.
A Royal Academy trained sculptor at that, whose work has also lapsed over into a lot of movies. And his name was John Humphreys. And John Humphrey was talking to Bob Kivier, and all of a sudden the conversation went, forget it. It just stopped. Not before John said, the man you should be looking for is Spiros. That was it. John had stopped dead because he'd just been signed up to work on the Ant and Dec movie, Alien Autopsy, the executive producers of which were Ray Santilli and his business partner, Gary Schofield. So, of course, he'll have signed a contract, no speak. Now, before we carry on, I contacted, I'm jumping ahead of my time. At this point in time, I'm working for a small publisher in Leeds. It's a lady. And she said, my boyfriend's coming. Now, we'd been there about 6 months, never seen or heard anything about a boyfriend, but we're having lunch, you know, you can all join us. So this chap comes, a nice guy, very affable, and I said, what do you do for a living? He said, well, he said, I trained as a barrister, but I've never, I'll probably say this wrong, but I never practiced at the bar. He said, I do contract law. That's my business. Now, my boss, the publisher, knew of my interest and involvement in the Alien Autopsy film. She'd obviously told him, he said, you never guess what I've got in my briefcase. So, no, I can't. He says, I've got the contract for Ray Santilli and Gary Schofield for the Ant and Dec movie, Alien Autopsy. I said, you're joking? No, he says, do you want to have a look at it? So I know it's not probably strictly legal what he did, but I took it out and I read it. So I knew the budget for the film. I knew how much Santilli.
What was the budget?
It was 15 million, I believe, off the top of my head. That might be wrong. I might be getting that mixed up with Fire in the Sky, but it was X million. And let's put it this way, Mr. Santilli and Mr. Schofield did very well out of it. So I arranged a meeting with Ray in London. Not long after this, I went down on the train. Normally we'd meet at his office, but this time it was in a little, it's like an old-fashioned gentleman's club that was nearby. And there we are, and they sat giving me all this, you know. And I just told them what I knew. And they nearly fell off their chair, Andrew. They were amazed. I knew what I knew about the Ant and Dec film and how much money they were getting paid. So I gets on the train, goes home. I got in touch with the film company in the UK. They were called QWERTY Films. And I said, I know as a rule, because you're making a movie, you can't tell me the plot or what's going to happen. You know, I'm just saying, you know, when the time comes when you can, would we be allowed, you know, an interview with somebody? I don't know, the director, the producer, or whoever. I got in touch with one of the executives, a lady, and she says, yeah, I'm sure we can sort that out, Philip. So I kept the emails going backwards and forwards, but not really asking any questions. Right at the end, I said, oh, there might be one question that you are allowed to tell me. I said, who's doing your special effects for you? She says, oh, that's John Humphreys. He's making the dummies for us, and he made the dummies for Ray Santilli as well. So I had confirmation, you know, and I didn't acknowledge that. I just said, thank you very much. See you later. I still have that email. I still have it printed out in my file. But then still couldn't prove anything, you know. So we jumped forward in time again and we're moving forward. I also helped out with a friend of mine who did a little magazine called UFO Data. And out of the blue, this chap is called Russell Callahan. It was his name on all, you know, everything we did. Got a phone call from a chap saying, I'm the man that made the Alien Autopsy film. So Russell said, well, it's not me you need to speak to, it's Philip. So he gives me his details, I ring him up, and the man on the end of the phone, Spiros Malaris. Now we'd already had the name Spiros from John Humphreys. We'd already confirmed that Humphreys made the dummies. And Spiros just started talking. I believe you have spoken with him. So you'll know
Spiros, absolutely.
So you'll know how he can talk. And I literally, by pure coincidence, I have my tapes here of my very first telephone conversation with Spiros. note, there are 2 tapes and they are both full, you know. And as Spiros is talking, I'm taking notes, and all the blanks that I'd been looking for down the years were just being filled in, you know. It was like I got a jigsaw puzzle with pieces missing, and then somebody's feeding me and I'm just slotting them home. So I stopped him at one point and I arranged to have a formal conversation with him, which I did, and asked him loads and loads of questions. So I said, okay, let's say the same to you. Show me your evidence. So at some point later, I went to his home, met his partner and her daughter. Spiros showed me his diaries from that time, you know, meeting with Santilli, you know, go and see John, or whatever. You know, the little pocket diaries.
Yep.
He then, and I found out that Spiros is also quite a good artist in his own right. He said, I did a storyboard, made it myself. And he's got pictures, you know, this size. And there's the storyboard of the Alien Autopsy film laid out in front of you. And so I got him to hold a couple up and took some photos of him. He got faxes from Kodak. That's one of Ray made the big thing about Kodak, and all Kodak films have a code on it, little black things. And it was, I think on those, it was a black box and something else. And of course, he's got Kodak telling him what edge codes he must have on the film. He then had a huge box of US military vehicle photographs. That's what he got them for. So at one point, this is true, Santilli said you could see the president of the United States. You know, you could see him so clearly on the film that you could see his lips move. And Spiros says, I wanted to build a set with a crash flying saucer in it and have an actor made up to look like the president. Obviously, there'd be no soundtrack, but you'd be able to read his lips. And I was going to put a military vehicle in the distance, but you could read the number plate. And I think he even showed me the one he was going to use. So if you go and check the archives, there's the number plate. It was, in fact, a genuine US military vehicle number plate. You know, and all kinds of other stuff. He had some, by this time, he got some telephone recordings with some of the others involved. They were known to be recorded. He asked them permission first. And that was it. You know, what I thought would take me a year at most to solve, in fact, took me a lot longer. But Spiros not only filled in all the blanks, everything he said, everything he told me, he could support that and show me evidence to back it up. So, hey presto, at long last, the Alien Autopsy film could be proven to be a hoax. I even have now a Polaroid of John Humphreys, you know, the sculptor with the original dummies. You know, he's got the molds. You can see the molds behind him. And I can tell it's an old John Humphreys and not a new one because he's got more hair. He's, you know, like a lot of us, I'm afraid, Andrew. The little things like that. And, you know.
You've still got the photos of the storyboard. You've got the photos of John Humphreys with the models. You've got lots of evidence to support what you've just said.
Yeah, I've got the email from QWERTY Films saying, oh, he's making the dummies for us and he made them for Ray Santilli. Because I had the common sense to print it out. Yeah. And it's all, the lady's name is there. It was a lady I was speaking. She's one of the executives as well. She's not the tea lady. And of course, you confront with this Santilli with this evidence. He at first denied ever knowing Spiros. Then he said Spiros had nothing to do with it. Then, of course, Santilli changed his story when the Ant and Dec film came out. Said, well, you know what happened? We got the film, we paid the money for it, and then pretty much most of it had deteriorated. So we did a restoration. And we hired a team to make it for us. And Spiros was part of that team. Well, I said, well, okay. If it's a restoration, why did you make 2 different autopsy films? And Ray's now all of a sudden forgotten about this other film. What 2 films? I don't remember. There's only the one. Well, there isn't. There's 2. And I have comments. I have quotes from my colleagues that also saw the other one. And I have got, I think it's 3 or 4 still photographs from it, given to me by Ray Santilli. Because if you've got two films, your restoration thing goes out the window, Andrew. Because so you're an art restorer. I hire you to do some work on the Mona Lisa. You don't just make an extra one, and not only make an extra one, you give it a big cheesy grin and blonde hair and bigger boobs, do you? You know, you don't. You restore the one you've got.
There's obviously a difference between, maybe it's the wording. A restoration is when you take an original and you restore it back to its original thing. A recreation.
No, he says restoration. And he even quotes the painting of Leonardo's Last Supper. So if you look at that film, there's hardly any of the original paint left. It's all being restored. So the only difference is, Ray, tens of thousands, if not millions of people have seen that film down the centuries. Nobody's ever seen your original film.
Right. So what would it, if Ray were here now, and I always like to make sure these are balanced, as you know, and I try to be fair to everybody. It's not coming from any particular angle other than to question what people say to me. Is what would Ray say now, having heard what you've just said?
He would say it's nonsense. It's a restoration, and his story is true. Ironically, his business partner, Gary Shoefield, was interviewed at the back end of last year, and he called it a recreation.
I can understand. So if he's turning around and saying Spiros Malaris basically set up the whole recreation, and that's how Spiros describes it, where he actually told me that he didn't sort of look at an original thing and try to recreate the scenes or anything. He just had a lot of research into what the creature might look like to make sure that's biologically correct. If it was to have a wound on its leg, well, he'd get a bit of a joint from the local butcher. He'd work out about the eyes and the head and the neck, and he'll do his research. And he talked me through the process that he said he went through to create that creature. And all what I called the convincers about, as you say, the telephone. So people wanted to look at the telephone, but he'd be a double convincer. So somebody would initially say, well, hang on, but they didn't have the curly wire. But then they'd do a little bit more research, and actually you could buy a bit of curly wire.
As I told you, one man ran out screaming and said, I've got him. It's the curly flex. Well, no, you haven't.
So the double convincer, all those sort of things. So he spoke about that, and he was saying that effectively he was doing not a restoration, but a recreation, and he was engaged to say that. Are you saying that Ray is saying, let's be really clear on this, that Ray is now confirming that Spiros did something? He's
yes, I have it in writing.
Okay. So Ray would say that, yes, Spiros was engaged, but Ray's story is that because the film disintegrated, he wanted to show what it would have looked like. Is that?
Yeah, he claims still to have a couple of little scraps of it. And even Shoefield said they had a minute and 20 seconds, I believe. But that, as you know, Andrew, that's still a lot of frames.
Well, it's a lot. I say 20 whatever it is, 24.
It's 24 frames a second, you know? So it's still a lot of frames. Nobody's ever seen them, by the way. You know,
but you had, and just so I'm getting the clarity on this, your UFO group who saw footage and were astounded you could hear a pin drop, that's the original footage, which was the tent footage. Is that basically it?
No. It's the autopsy film where the creature has a hole in its leg.
Right. So
that autopsy film has never been seen anywhere. That's the one Spiros made. Yes. Okay.
So your group saw Spiros's film.
Yes.
Okay, I've got that.
Well, I asked this question of many others. Well, okay, Spiros, why did you make two films? He said, the other one you've seen is actually the first one we made. And it was his girlfriend at the time. She'd done a lot of the studying of the medical procedures. And she said, when we played it back, she said, that's wrong. You've done that wrong. If you show that on anywhere, game's up. So he said at that point, you know, Santilli's ready for throwing the towel in. All the money's been spent. So Spiros says, I've funded another one. We still have the mold. We made it overnight. Go to check the mold the next day. Of course, it's got a big hole in it. So we improvise. You know, we get a bone from the butchers, put it in, we burn the leg. It's not unreasonable for something that's crashed to have an injury. And off we go. What was even more interesting is that overnight, they'd left this creature on the slab with all its giblets cut out. When they got there the next morning, they'd been burgled. Somebody broken into the apartment, because this was filmed in Camden. And the only thing that was stolen was a replica handgun that they were going to use. But you see, can you imagine the burglar opening the door and seeing that thing laid on the slab? You know, because Spiros' first reaction was, we've been rumbled. The burglar's going to do it, but he can't do us in because he's a burglar. If he said, I'm burgling this house, he's going to get arrested himself. So there's a burglar out there somewhere, you know, that saw this thing. So it's little stories like that as well.
On the final day of the shoot, when everything was shut down, you're saying that a burglar came into Spiros's girlfriend's flat and stole a handgun. It
was a replica. They'd made the first film.
They broke into the flat and they stole something.
Yeah. They made the first film. It was no good. So they set them, you know, the dummy in the mold to make another one. Came back the next day, and they'd been burgled, you know, and they made the next film and got on with it. This is why, because they'd run out of money. All the budget had been spent making the first one. Now, I've seen the first film, and it is clearer than the one we've all seen on television. It's brighter. The camera doesn't go as close, so it doesn't go out as focus as much. It's a little bit longer. And Spiros will tell you the reason it's brighter is because he never ran it through the computer to darken it a little bit. You know, and they do a different little procedure. I've only seen it once, so I don't know. But they do a gynecological examination of this creature. And apparently that's the kind of thing you wouldn't do in an autopsy. So if you'd shown that, game was up. They'd made a mistake. So Spiros says, I'll fund the crew to do another one. We'll make one overnight. That's why he claims that the copyright of it, because he funded it. You know, it was his money that made it. He designed it. You know, he filmed it. He, you know, etc., etc. And of course, that's the one that everyone is seeing on television. The only difference is, big difference is, Spiros says we never intended to sell it to any television company. The idea was we'd let it go out, and then 6-9 months down the line, we'd all go, da-da, aren't we great? In the hope, because he used to run his own little film crew, that they'd get more work, that John Humphreys as a fantastic sculptor would get more work. But Ray was still claiming that this tent footage is what he'd bought, and he hadn't made his money back. So off he went and ignored it.
So I'm trying here, Philip, to look at the differences in the story, because you said earlier that Ray agrees that it was whether it's a recreation or a reproduction, a restoration. Restoration. I mean, it's very important, the language, very important. But you're now saying that Ray is not denying that Spiros was engaged.
No, I have a letter from Ray saying that Spiros Malaris was a gun for hire, whom we used, and he did a very good job. But lo and behold, he's now claiming he did everything. You know, then cast aspersions at the end of it. So he's admitted that he was involved, yes.
Okay, so if he's involved, why does it matter? Why does it matter that he might have done a film which wasn't quite right and then he did another one? Why does it matter?
Because they wanted to use this as an experiment. You have to remember, Spiros is also a magician. And the film that only a few of us seen is a mistake. So if you would release that on television, their planned exposure 6 months down the line is not going to work overnight.
I get it's not a very good recreation, reproduction, restoration. It's not a very good one. That's why they did it again. But why does the fact that there are two movies affect the credibility of Ray's story, of Ray's admitting that he engaged Spiros to do some work?
Yeah, well, Ray's now forgetting that there's two films. I did a little documentary series earlier this year called Alien Autopsy, The Search for Answers. It's on Amazon Prime. It's a 4-part thing, but they actually get an interview with Sam Tilley. Bearing in mind, I've told him about these two films, and they ask him about, well, you showed Philip these two films, two separate autopsy films. Can't remember that. You know, can't remember that. because Ray knows in his own mind that if you have two films, his restoration, not recreation, his restoration explanation goes out of the window because they are two different films. It's the same creature, same environment, but they are two different ones. And if you're doing a recreation, an honest recreation of something, Andrew, you wouldn't need to do two. You would restore the original. Like I said, he mentioned The Last Supper, saying that, that painting's only got hardly any of it. I checked up actually, and he's right. I think there's only about 20% of the original paint in Leonardo's Last Supper. But the point is, they haven't changed it down the years. It's still got the same people.
No, I understand that. And you would go to an expert in restoration if that's what you're doing. And I think as opposed to a TV producer, a film producer, however good they are, where they're recreating the scene. I get that. Yeah. So all I'm trying to do, Philip, is work out the areas of difference. Because we've got it that Ray is turning around and saying he's engaged Spiros. The question would be why? What's he engaged Spiros to do? Spiros is not, to my knowledge, an expert in restoration, but he could reproduce scenes if he's a TV director and make that convincing. When you're looking at it, it's trying to work out the areas of difference. So the big question to me would be this, is where is Ray's story consistent with Spiros's story? And they're both saying that Spiros was engaged to
that's about it. There is no real consistency thereafter.
Well, the area of difference then would be the original film, and that is the question, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, if they've hired Spiros as part of the restoration process, then surely Spiros must have been shown some of the film.
But what I don't get, and I think it's a good question for Ray, is why wouldn't you go to a restoration expert? If you have this very valuable film from 1947, what you don't do is go to somebody and say, well, it's not a restoration. Can you recreate some of the scenes, which I'll then splice in or whatever? What I would have thought you would have done is go to the experts in the world to say, okay, I've got the film from 1947.
Absolutely. There's a similar scenario here with I think it was either this year or last year. A family had a painting that had been in the family for about 50 years. Yeah. And they were adamant that it was a lost Da Vinci. And of course, they took it to the experts, and that's exactly what it turned out to be, worth millions upon millions. Santilli lived within a short drive of Kodak. He could have hand delivered a couple of frames. Bear in mind, even today, they say they've got 1 minute 20 of frames left. So a couple of frames is not going to hurt it. And if it gets that seal of approval, Andrew, as you know, with anything that you're claiming is of historical significance, then the numbers on the end of the value start to increase. And Santilli is a businessman, and he's no fool, because he said right from the beginning, I intend to commercialize this film. So in order to do that, surely he would have had it authenticated, but he never did. So that speaks volumes. Okay, let's assume your story's right, Ray. This film sits in this gentleman's cellar for 50 years, and he's fine because he puts it on a projector and shows you it on his wall, and it's perfect. But 18 months later, when you get it, it started to melt and stick together, and you have to retrieve bits and bobs from it. Let's assume that's true. Then you would go to the professionals. You wouldn't go to AK Music in Milton Keynes, who incidentally had no equipment to transfer film to video. So I'm talking celluloid. They only ever worked in video, not celluloid. So you wouldn't go there in the first instance. So, and there are plenty of, experts in London. I mean, he lives, in the commuter belt. His offices are in London. You think of an expert that you want in that field, Andrew, will be there somewhere.
We're right in the heart of London. We're right in the heart of creative. Soho has all sorts of studios that can help with restoration and that sort of.
I've got Kodak and the British Film Institute saying we'll do it for free.
Absolutely. That's only over the bridge at just by Waterloo and wherever it might have been at that sort of stage. That's the interesting thing. And I, as I say, to be fair, Philip, it's always a question of saying, look, if they're not in the room, what would the other person say?
Yeah.
And what you're saying is, and I think your description of what you said, it's clearly, if you're going to engage Spiros, then it's not a restoration, it's a recreation. And that to me would be fairly
But if it was a restoration, take Santilli's argument that it was a restoration and that they still had some pieces of film left on which to base it, plus Santilli's memory, of course, then surely your restorer, irrespective if he's a specialist or a magician like Spiros, surely you would have to show him the damn thing first. So this, here you go. This is what it looked like. But he didn't. Spiros will tell you, I never saw any film. And nobody's seen any film.
Well, I saw, I mean, one of the things I saw maybe on a TV program was maybe it's the tent footage where you had lots of people passing by. There was somebody on a stretcher. You mentioned this beforehand. What is that the footage that Ray, or you believe that Ray is claiming is from 1947? Is that
No,
the footage?
No. He claims that was made by the people in Milton Keynes, AK Music.
Okay, so that one is, and that's the son, and that's the head that you spoke about. So the footage that he go back to, and I say it's a question for Ray.
Here's another little thing I've forgotten, Andrew.
Yeah.
To coincide with the launch of the Ant and Dec film, Ray made a documentary with Eamon Holmes called Eamon Investigates.
Yes.
And in that, Eamon asks him about, we've tended to forget about this, and there's another piece coming up in a moment as well, this debris film. So you've got these big I-beams, these hand panels, and he asked him about it. We said, what about that? Ray's answer, oh, that was artistic license. He opens the boot of his car, and there are the molds in his boot for these various pieces of debris. So it was artistic license. So even Ray's admitting that the debris film, which was sold to Fox and many of the other broadcasters around the world, is fake.
Or parts.
It's fake. Artistic license. It's fake.
Yeah. So parts.
We move on forward in time from all of this. Forget Spiros for a moment. We're asking Ray, and saying, well, look, surely your cameraman, if all this is real, why don't he speak up? Various television companies were hammering at Ray's door. Come on, let's get an interview. So Ray, hey presto, and very few people knew about this, produced a video of the cameraman. It's an old boy sat in front of a camera with a piece of paper, pair of specs, and a cap on. The questions have been sent to him by Bob Kivier, producer of Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction, and he just sits there and he answers the questions. And of course, it's filmed on video, so you can turn the contrast up and you can see his face. And this video cassette was delivered to Bob Kivier in America, and Bob immediately said, this is fake. It was supposedly the cameraman's son that hand delivered it. It was fake. And in the interview that Gary Shoefield did on a podcast at the end of last year, even he admits there that the cameraman's interview is a fake. And he said, well, we were under so much pressure, we just did it. And he just shrugs his shoulders and laughs it off. So you've got the people involved admitting that they faked the cameraman's interview, that the debris film is fake, that the tent footage was made by another company and it's still fake. They've forgotten they've got 2 autopsy films, so it's now down to 1. So don't you see, you're in the law, Andrew, do you see a pattern emerging here?
And this is the interesting. So let's then go to motive. Because you told me beforehand that it was shown to the your UFO group, and they all went wow, and then you got involved. You agreed to get involved in producing the film, and you were paid £2,000 for doing something.
Yeah.
What is the motive, first of all, why you're now going against Ray, and what do you think Ray's motive is?
Ray's motive was said from day one to commercialize it. He never made any secret of that, Andrew. It was money. And he said, I'm a commercial animal. This is what I do for a living, and I aim to commercialize it. And I never had a problem with that, because had it been someone else, they'd have done probably the same. Maybe a different route, but this, you know, they would have done the same. So I never had a problem with that. It was his property, so it was his to do with as he saw fit, and he told me that. And so it was money for Fox, $250,000 plus a share of the video sales. It was the biggest selling documentary of that year on video. I even know, for example, he got, this just shows you, it wasn't always big sums of money to show it in Russia. The Russians paid him $10,000. The reason I know that is because two of my colleagues in Russia were part of the debating team. They negotiated between the TV company for him, you know. And it was shown around the world. There's games made of it, Andrew. You can buy top Alien Autopsy toys. I've got a model of it over here, you know. So you know, money was always the game. The movie, you know. But Ray would say, quite rightly, he didn't lie on. He said, "We've given it to such and such a company for free." What he forgot to add is, yes, for broadcasting it, some of these companies did get it for free, but we've actually got a share of the video sales instead. So it wasn't always what he said, it was what he didn't say that was important. So money was a motive.
I mean, you mentioned about the £2,000. To clarify for me, what did you do for that £2,000?
Yeah, well, I actually wrote the documentary. So when you hear the narration on it by Brian Blessed, those are my words. I then set up Kodak to test the film, because this was all going to be filmed. You know, we'd have Kodak on it, and you know, they'd run through the process. We then wanted interviews of various Roswell witnesses. I was able to put him in touch with some of them. So it was up to him to arrange that. He didn't go down that line. He found a gentleman who had already interviewed the witnesses, so he just licensed that from them. It was an easier option. So some of the things I lined up, he didn't use. Some of the other things I did, but basically I was mainly the writer of it, and lined up a whole host of things that he just didn't use. But that was up to him, you know, whether he used them or not. And that was done. That was totally separate to anything, you know.
And at that stage, at the time you're doing that, you believed the footage to be genuine?
I believed it could be, yes. What I decided to do, rather than call it a fake, because like I said, I looked at Ray and I said, wouldn't it be ironic if you've had all these UFO researchers for decades looking for proof of Roswell, and here's a London businessman looking for old bits of Elvis film who stumbles across it? Wouldn't that be ironic? I thought, what a great story that would be. So I give him the benefit of the doubt, and I said, you know, I actually took my leave from a colleague in South Africa. She's no longer with us. She said, give him every opportunity, Philip, to show you that it's authentic before you, because it's easy to point at something and say it's fake. That's the easiest thing in the world. So that's what I did. I gave Ray every opportunity to prove to us that this was the real McCoy. And sadly, he was unable to do that. And down the years, we proved the opposite. You know, I just stuck at it, Andrew. I was determined, no matter how long it took, I was going to get to the bottom of it. Like I said, I didn't think it'd take as long as it did. You know, I had all my hair and it wasn't grey at that time either, you know.
But I say that's interesting. Well, let me ask you this then. If you, for the Elvis, because you say this was like a bonus when Ray was buying the Elvis footage, do you believe he bought the Elvis footage?
No, we found who we bought Elvis footage from. We bought it from a DJ called Bill Randall. And it wasn't, you know, an unknown piece of Elvis footage. It was a well-known piece, but Ray bought it from him. And I told you about the French television show that Ray did, went out live. Well, they announced that on there because they tracked down Bill Randall and he'd sold Ray a piece of Elvis footage. And Ray's made various Elvis documentaries down the years, and there's none of them with a little piece of Elvis film on there that nobody else has ever seen. It's not there. It doesn't exist. And like I said, even when he did the Daily Mirror feature or the Sunday Mirror feature about his trip to Cleveland in 1992, he talks about the letters from Elvis. There's not one mention that while I'm on this trip, oh, and by the way, I bought a bit of Elvis footage as well while I'm here. You know, there's no sign of it anywhere. But the Elvis footage he did buy is from a chap called Bill Randall. And they contacted Bill and said, yeah, I sold him it.
But Bill Randall didn't turn around and say, I've also sold him some Alien footage.
No, not at all. He was never a military cameraman. He was a DJ.
So in conclusion on this one, Ray will no doubt be watching this. What would you like to say to Ray?
I would just like to say to Ray, look, time's up. You've made your money out of it. You've had a laugh. It's time to tell the truth. We all know it's a fake. We all know Spiros and John Humphreys and his colleagues made it. It was made in a flat in Camden. You've made your money out of it. No harm's going to come to you. It's I'm here, ready and waiting. If you want to, confess. How do they use the word now? Is it fess up? If you want to fess up, I'm here. I've always been willing to speak to Ray. I've no grudge against him. He did what he did, and that's it. So I'd like to draw it to a conclusion. But having said that, Andrew, I'm not going to mention any names, but there are a small core of people out there that no matter what, if Ray signed an affidavit in blood, they would still think that the Alien Autopsy film is real.
Oh, no, I get that. And just as, and maybe this is then the last one, but just as your mother told you that at the age of 12, she saw a fairy and you believed her that she believed it. You didn't believe that she saw a fairy, but you believed that she believed she'd seen a fairy.
Yeah.
Do you believe that Ray believes he has an original film?
No. Because we can follow the timeline from where the very genesis of it started, at his meeting with Keith Bateman, the little brainstorming session they had. So wouldn't it be great if we had some Elvis footage? And that's the genesis of the Alien Autopsy film. And that's where it started.
And on that note, if anybody does have any evidence they'd like to bring forward, you can write to us at ufo@octopustv.com. That's ufo@octopustv.com. And we will look at that and get all of the experts over. Because if people did come forward with evidence, Philip, you'd listen to that evidence, wouldn't you?
Of course. People come forward about UFO sightings all the time. I've been involved with another old UFO sighting from the States. And that's turned out the opposite. We've turned out to prove that this thing was authentic and bring more eyewitnesses forward as a result. So, yeah, willing to listen to any evidence.
Fantastic. Well, we'll look at that. What is the name of that one for a future episode?
That's actually the anniversary of it today. It was the Pascagoula incident involving Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, Pascagoula, Mississippi, October the 11th, 1973.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll have a little trailer for that straight after this, as it's the anniversary. But for now, Philip, thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure.